Welcome to Dev Diary, the series where I try to make my own video games, and y'all, this one might just be for me today, so let's do a bit of setup. Now, I love me some good old retro futurism. Now, if you're not familiar, the aesthetic is basically what people think the future will look like, but through the scope of the technology of the time. For example, like the 1950s, thinking that we'd have flying cars and jetpacks by now. Or better yet, the example that inspires today's project, what computer interfaces could look like in the future through the lens of the 80s. It's that plain text on a black background. But this is the future, so maybe we'll also have some rudimentary graphics or some 3D wireframes. Now, I'm getting the aesthetic out of the way at the start here because this is what our game looks like, and it hits on all those key visuals that we just went over. But thanks to some custom shader work and a lot of stacking of gamemaker's built-in shaders, I was able to turn this basic looking interface into something much more retro. Indeed, this is not a video effect, but a real-time stack of shaders that reproduces that retro VHS style to what I think is a pretty satisfying degree. It really hits that analog horror aesthetic too, which I am also a fan of, and it's arguably the most impressive part of today's project. Though that is not to take away from what it took to make this thing a reality, so let's talk about what exactly this was all for. It's, well, like if Minecraft was made for the retro future of the 80s. To the left are the main features. The first is storage, which keeps track of the player's inventory. And because this is just for fun, there are only 7 things that the player can mine. But as we'll see throughout, each resource has its own unique data for various purposes. The second feature is the crafting menu, and it's here where the player will spend their resources to upgrade their mining capabilities. This includes mining damage and energy and carry capacities. Each upgrade has its own cost requirements, and for the sake of time I didn't bother to math out a proper increase of said requirements per level. One of the upgrades in particular is the amount of mining drones that the player owns, which brings us to the next feature, deployment. The deployment screen defaults to a view of 3 planets. These are potential planets that the player can deploy a miner to in order to gather resources. Basically, they're like Minecraft world chunks, but simplified and broken down to become a game mechanic. The player can rescan at any time, which simply generates a new list of planets. Once a miner is deployed, the planet is then actually created, including its randomly generated terrain, and then stored in a list. This list can then be accessed at any time by hitting tab. All currently deployed miners will be listed, and when clicked, will move the player to the fourth and final feature, the mining. And this feature is pretty straightforward. It's basically 2D Minecraft, only obviously there is no avatar to control. Instead, the player simply clicks a tile to mine it, which is where all that resource data mentioned earlier comes into play. So for example, dirt is easier to mine than stone, which is easier to mine than iron, and so forth. And of course, the player can keep track of everything that they've mined by hitting tab. Now, the only restrictions here are that the player can only mine a tile if it is connected to an open space, and more importantly, if they have enough energy and capacity. The twist here is that the max energy and carry capacity are determined when the miner is deployed. Now, the player can recall a miner at any time by pressing the retrieve button, and this will collect the gathered resources and delete the entry from the list of planets. Yes, once a miner leaves, the planet is gone for good. So the aim here was to encourage the player to continuously cycle through the process of deploying drones, gathering resources, and upgrading their gear with said resources. Now, keen-eyed folk may have noticed that the mining energy does in fact come back over time, so patient players could maximize their excursions, but eventually capacity runs out. And yes, this is why there is purposely so much dang dirt on each planet. Also, let's not think about the fact that each planet has the same material makeup. But with that all said, let me just say that while this interface may look pretty basic, my god, was it a pain in the butt to actually code. Like seriously, I'll throw up some quick examples of just some of the visual code, but I would say that the visuals alone take up like half the entire code base for this project. And a lot of it could potentially be fixed with some optimization. But speaking of which, a big reason I didn't go into more detail regarding the shaders for this one is simply because the thing is unoptimized like crazy. Like on average, the FPS is fine, but sometimes, despite taking precautions, like with the mining section, the frame rate tanks to like half. and it's just further proof that I have a lot to learn about shaders and just how to properly use them. But I just gotta admit that shaders are very hard to get right, unless you're really good at math. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the project, so now I would like to know what you thought of the project. For example, what do you think would make a great addition? And are you a fan of the retro future aesthetic? Or, did this entire video give you a headache? And if so, I apologize. But regardless, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And remember that if you liked the video, leaving a like would be great. But I am also on Patreon if you would like to support the channel further. Also, consider subscribing if you're new to the channel. But with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.